Hello everybody, I am Jarrett Ross, the GeneaVlogger, and welcome back to another Professional Genealogist Reacts. On today's video, I will be reacting to my Ancestry DNA results, home team by home team history. Now this is a channel that I'm quite familiar with. This is a channel about African history. It is really good. I highly recommend people go and check it out. So I'm really looking forward to this, especially because I'm sure that he's going to have a very interesting insight into his results because he has such an in-depth knowledge of African history. Now, I actually don't know his ancestry at all. I don't think he's ever really talked about it too much from what I know, at least the videos I've seen. But I would assume that he comes from an African-American background just because he has I guess what you could say a general American accent, but also being that he is into history and knows how to research, a lot of people who do often will look into their family trees. And so I wonder if he already has a pretty good knowledge of his own family tree and what he might be able to expect. So I'm not going to say anything else, but before we do jump into the video, please be sure to give this a thumbs up. That really does help me out. Also, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell for notifications on future videos. But with all of that fun stuff said, let's jump into the video.
What up, African world? It's your boy Home Team here. I'm back at it with a video of African history, culture, and worldview. So yeah, based on my other DNA results, I thought I would show you guys, my results from a different company, because some of you guys were saying, hey, you should measure it against, another company to see what you get. And to see,
I wonder who he tested with before, because I didn't realize he had done a test already.
The comparisons. So I have my results.
And I am noticing this is from 2017, so this is a bit older of a video. So his DNA results have been updated a couple of times. So I wonder if he's done any updates since this.
Results right here. I want you guys to also put down what you think, these results may be. This is
Before he jumps into it, if it's just basing off the fact that I think he's coming from an African-American background, I would probably guess that he's going to have somewhere between 70 and 85% African, and then 15 to 30% European.
Yeah, so my results are 91% African.
Okay.
And it says 9% European. And
that's actually a much lower percentage of European that I usually find with anyone who has a general African-American background. Also, I should say that would be specific or slightly different than what you would expect with, any Afro-Caribbean or anything like that.
For, I guess, the regions that they have here is 36% Benin, Togo, 17% Nigerian.
Yep.
12% Africa, Southeastern Bantu, 9% Mali, and 7% Ivory Coast, Ghana. And they got some trace regions in there. Probably not going to read that. And for Europe, it was 8% Great Britain, and they had one trace region. And it was less than 1% Europe West. Okay. Whatever that means. So yeah, the Great Britain part, it makes sense because based off where my parents are from. My mom's Jamaican.
Oh, interesting.
From Antigua, and yeah, that makes sense. And
okay.
Yeah, so basically these two companies are pretty much telling me that, and again, these are just ranges, so it's not really golden numbers per se.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
One company told me 100%, sub-Saharan African, and the other company, this company is telling me 91% African. So if we just kind of take from those two companies, they're pretty much telling me that
What was the other company though? If anybody knows, comment below. I'm hoping he'll mention it. At a continental level, I'd be surprised for a test not to pick up any of the European, especially with 9% European ancestry, even though that's lower than someone with a typical African-American background, which I think it kind of does make sense. If his mom is Jamaican, that could be part of it. Hopefully he's going to mention it.
I'm in between 90 and 100% African, pretty much, which is dope. I'm elated, especially because of the passion I have for African people, African history, African culture, where I come from. And these DNA tests are pretty much validating that, for me. I hope you guys like can really, take the test for yourself, to see, your background and stuff like that. You should also take multiple tests, I feel, because I've taken multiple tests for my maternal, which was Fulani, and my paternal ancestry, which was Mbundu from.
So what he's saying with the maternal, and I'm going to go back so we can hear what his background is. The maternal, that's looking at what's known as mitochondrial DNA. The paternal is looking at what's known as Y chromosome DNA. So one's your mother's line, perfectly all the way back, tracing thousands of years. The other is your father's line, tracing back all the way thousands of years. And basically because of how those are inherited, you can tell very specifically and very confidently where those lines are coming from. So when you have that, for sure, if you go up that line, you will eventually get back to basically where they're kind of estimating. So let's go back just a little bit.
Which was Fulani, and my paternal ancestry, which was Mbundu from Angola. So that pretty much means like, my mother's mother, like, 500 plus years ago was a Fulani woman. And my father's father, like 500 plus years ago, was Mbundu from Angola. I don't really take, like, to be honest, the region serious, because I know that, these countries are like artificial borders, pretty much. Like, there's, like, for instance, I'm like 9% Mali, right? In Mali, you have very distinct ethnic groups, right? You have the Tuareg, you have the Bambara. A long time ago, you had, the Mandinka, who dominated in that region. You have Fulani, you have the Songhai, and all these people are very different from each other. So, like, if I don't really know much about African history, and I know about the Mali Empire, and I'm just like, and I see, hey, I'm 9% Mali, it's gonna be like, that doesn't really mean you're like descended from the Mali Empire, So like,
this is exactly what I was hoping for, because it really goes to show when you have a true knowledge of the end, or not the answer, but the regions where your family comes from. And it's more about not just a general history, it's more of a knowledge of the history of the population group specifically, which, I mean, I guess you could say that's, that is the history. But I mean, it's kind of like he's mentioning all of these different, population groups of people that are very different from each other. But then when you look at it from a modern day standpoint, when you just define it by Mali, then it's takes out a lot of the true context that you need to understand what it actually means.
You just kind of have to know how to like measure this stuff and really interpret it, because if not, it can really not mess you up, but it can really confuse you in a sense. So Benin, Togo, like 36%, like that's pretty high. So and 17% Nigeria. A lot of people, especially like Nigerians, they like come to my aunts a lot, my mom's side, and they say, hey, like y'all like Nigerian or whatever, because I guess we're like, Nigerians pretty much, and it's kind of validating that in the DNA. So I think that's pretty cool. A lot of Jamaicans come from Nigeria and Ghana, so it makes sense. And for Benin, Togo, there's a lot of like Fulani in Benin and Togo, or Benin, I believe. So Fulanis are everywhere, so it makes sense. So I don't know what particular ethnic group in Benin I come from, so like that doesn't really mean anything to me. So, but 91% African, man, like that's dope. And the other test was 100%, sub-Saharan African. So I'm just gonna go with, the in-between or whatever. Pretty much I'm in the high 90s of African descent. And yeah.
All right. Okay, I think, is that the end of the video? Does he have it? Yeah, that's the end of the video. Okay, so that was a pretty good video. He didn't go as deep into what he knows of his family history as I was kind of hoping. He did mention his mom is from Jamaica, which does give a bit more context. I do wonder what part of Jamaica she's from, because it could be possible to trace her ancestry. There are actually a good amount of Jamaican records online, although certain parishes are a bit easier to research into than others. One thing a lot of people may not realize about me is I actually have a lot of relatives in Jamaica. I had a huge part of my family's branch who went to Jamaica and lived in an area called Spanish Town. So I've done a good amount of research there. There's a website, Jamaican Family Search, which has a lot of information. But it was very interesting to see, you know, with 9% European, assuming that was coming from just one ancestor of his, that would be the equivalent of a great-grandparent. I think more than likely it's probably coming from both sides, which means that both his mom and dad would have some sort of distant European ancestry. If they were able to take the DNA test, that would help tell him whether or not. Because if it is coming from one side, then it might actually be something where he could figure it out. I will have to go and check out the other video he did for the other ancestry results. I'm really curious what DNA test he took for that, especially if they weren't picking up on any of the European. But I think it would be very interesting to trace into his family tree. I actually did contact him about being on my YouTuber family tree series, so that I could trace his family tree, and unfortunately he wasn't into it, which, you know, I can understand, especially from a privacy standpoint. And then one last thing I do want to say, that, you know, with what he was saying, where, you know, when it tells him, you know, Molly, he's, you know, he understands that it's like, well, you know, it's kind of a general thing because you say Molly, but then that could include, you know, these different population groups. You know, one thing is it still is kind of giving more of a definitive view, where it's like, okay, well, now I can know that at least I have some connection to possibly one of these groups of people. You know, it still is kind of generalized, where you're not sure which group, or maybe you even have ancestry connected to multiple different groups within those areas. But if he were able to overcome the difficulties in tracing his ancestry past that wall of slavery, these DNA results could help guide him in his further research. Well, thank you so much for checking out this video. I do hope that you enjoyed. If you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. That really does help me out. You can also click right about here if you'd like to subscribe. It is completely free to do so. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at GeneaVlogger. I'm the GeneaVlogger. See you in my next video.